So, pounds and ounces could be returning to some shops as part of a review of EU laws after Brexit. The government is looking to change the law so it's legal for shops, market stalls and supermarkets to use imperial weights again. Campaigners are calling for a pardon of a Sunderland greengrocer. Steve Thoburn was fined in for using scales that didn't have metric, along with other market traders who became known collectively as the metric martyrs. Neil Heron is director of the Metric Martyrs Pressure Group and was friends with Stephen Thoburn. Good evening to you, Neil.
Evening, Stephen. How are you doing?
Good evening. It nearly, I don't want to diminish this because I'm sure nobody wants to be fined, but it nearly sounds farcical that of all of the ills in this society, people were fined for using the wrong measurements.
Well, you said that they were the wrong measurements. They were the measurements that the customers insisted being served in. And it was a system of weights and measures that lots of people use. So it only became the wrong measurements. It became the wrong measurement when, as a result of a European directive, which was nodded through Parliament via statutory instrument without discussion or debate, and then it became a criminal offence on January the 1st, 2000.
Describe to me what happened then in 2001, Neil.
Well, in 2000, two trade and standards officers and two police officers entered Stephen Thoburn's market stall on the 4th of July, and he was asked to hand over his 3 sets of imperial scales, and if he didn't hand them over, he would be arrested. And just to dispel a common misconception and myth, Stephen had metric scales. He dual-priced. He would serve anybody, whether they wanted to be served in imperial or metric. But the truth was that his customers preferred to be served in imperial measures, so that's what he catered for.
They literally walked in with 2 cops with them, did they?
Yes, he was threatened. He would be arrested if he resisted.
And what did he do?
Well, after the colourful language and expletives and profanities removed, he probably said nothing.
And then what happened?
3 sets of scales were seized. He was subsequently tried at Sunderland Magistrates Court and found guilty on 2 charges of using imperial weighing machines. The case attracted lots of international and national media attention. The case was then consolidated and taken to the High Court with a number of other traders. Bear in mind there were thousands, if not tens of thousands, of criminal acts taking place every day. And other big supermarkets were still selling by the pound. You had McDonald's selling quarter-pounders. But the government and trading standards decided to prosecute the smaller independent shopkeepers and market traders rather than the big corporates. We ended up losing in the Court of Appeal, and every time we lost in the courts and came out, we won on the court steps. The hearts and minds of the British public were wholeheartedly behind. I mean, even when Stephen turned up to the High Court in London, taxi drivers wouldn't take any money off him. He got a round of applause as he walked into the Royal Court of Justice. And the people knew that this was a fight just about fairness, about justice, and you can't bring laws in which haven't been discussed or debated in front of Parliament or discussed and agreed with the people.
And what impact did it have on Stephen getting that record?
Well, it was a massive impact. He was there to serve his customers, and he thought after the first conviction he'd go back and his customers would be disappointed that he'd lost. They rallied wholeheartedly behind him and pressured him to carry on and continue the fight, which he did. And he continued to do it, and tragically he died shortly after we lost the case at the European Court of Human Rights. He died of a massive heart attack, aged 39, leaving a widow and 2 small children. And bear in mind, Stephen, not one member of the public had ever complained. This was as a result of an undercover consumer protection exercise where they went in trading standards deemed it was necessary to protect the public from such an action of selling goods by the pound.
And he had sold a bunch of bananas for 34p.
Yes, I think it was just over £1. There were 25 pence a pound, and he sold 34 pence worth of bananas to an undercover consumer protection officer.
Stephen got a criminal record for selling 34p's worth of bananas to an undercover trading standards officer using pounds and ounces.
Yeah. us as we look back 20 years later. And obviously you can understand why the campaign attracted so much passion and anger from across the British public. This was not about which system of weights and measures is best, whether imperial or metric is better for whichever circumstance. It was about the freedom to trade in a system of weights and measures that customers knew and understood, and the traders knew and understood, and nobody was being deceived.
So what are you calling for now, and why?
Well, we're calling for a posthumous royal pardon. The law is about to be changed. We forced the European Commission to back down in 2000 eventually. 2007 they eventually backed down and decided that it wasn't their agenda that was being driven forward. That forced the British government to back down and effectively call it an unofficial moratorium. So the law still exists where it remains a criminal offence to use imperial measures, use imperial scales, price with imperial prominence. But because of the actions of the Metric Martyrs campaign, every time there was an attempted prosecution, we would intervene, and the council officials decided it wasn't in their interest to continue. Hackney Council decided in 2008 to go after a 64-year-old market trader called Janet Devers. And there was again a massive public reaction in support of the campaign. And Janet was unusual because some of the cases in Janet's case were triable either way, which means that she could be heard at the magistrates' court or heard at the Crown Court in front of a jury. And she lost some of the cases at magistrates' court, but when elected to be tried by jury, the council abandoned the case, which is extremely interesting. I don't think there would be a jury in the land that would convict the market trader of selling things to customers by the pound.
So until the law is changed then, are you saying it's still a criminal offence?
Absolutely. The law has been turned a blind eye to by trading standards officers. It's deemed not proportionate or in the public interest to go down the route of challenging and charging traders anymore. So that's why you'll see in markets across the land people using metric scales or dual price scales with imperial price prominence and effectively selling by the pound and breaking the law of the 1999 price marking orders. But really, the whole world has gone back to trading in a way that customers and shopkeepers understand.
And Neil, was the law that you couldn't use the label, or that you couldn't weigh it, or you couldn't use the scales, or what was the law?
Both. You couldn't use scales which weighed only in imperial. If you had dual price scales which weighed in imperial or metric, you had to conduct the final transaction in imperial. If you priced by the pound, it could be no more prominent. It had to be less prominent than the metric price. They were all criminal offences under the 1985 Weights and Measures Act and the 1999 price marking orders.
Peter Burke's with me tonight. Peter's on the committee of the UK Metric Association. Hello, Peter.
Hi, Stephen. How are you doing?
When we think of the criminality in this country, when we think of how the police do not have the time, and trading standards, quite frankly, have not had the time over years, we think of the massive fraudsters who are engaging in online scams, ripping pensioners of their life savings. And here were a couple of cases that we've heard from Neil tonight of people being pursued, one of them for a 34p bunch of bananas.
Yeah, let me start by saying hello to Neil. And
Hi,
how are you doing? And good, congratulations on the persistence and fortitude which you've carried out your campaign. I don't agree with everything you say, but I mean certainly you're talking about what a lot of people see as a major miscarriage of justice, and and I think I fully defend your right to speak up for your friend. And sadly, he's no longer with us. He clearly suffered a lot as a result of what happened, and I'm not going to try and defend the police action in this particular case. That's not what we're about. Because, I mean, I think you're quite right. The police have enforced the law with discretion and compassion since that time, and I think that's the right thing to do, because there are other offences that are more important. And I think there are just a couple of issues of principle I wanted to draw attention to.
And Peter, just before we get into the issues of principle, just to clear this up, would you support Neil's campaign to have this pardon for Steve Thoburn?
I think it's got to be decided in a proper way. What was decided at the time was that he had broken the law as it was on that at that time, and you can't change the law retrospectively. However, I think, looking at what happened, the action that was taken would now, in retrospect, seem to be harsh. I'm not there to defend that. I think I'm not a judge. I'm not there to say whether he was guilty or innocent. I think the evidence would have to be weighed up.
Yeah.
So that's a separate issue, though, from the whole issue of what Tigger are now saying. In other words, Tigger being in Duncan Smith's body, which is recommending that the law should be changed and that they should roll back on what has been established legislation in this country, that metric measures should be the main units for certain products. And it's very complicated, obviously. What we're most enthusiastic about is to avoid confusion, avoid dual marking, avoid dual units. Now, isn't it strange, though, that we run in kilometres in this country, we drive in miles, we drink our beer in pints, we drink wine and spirits in millilitres or centilitres, and there's no sense at all in that. It just causes confusion. I'm a doctor, I have to say. In medicine, science, engineering, and in the building trade and industry, in almost every field of life, including marketing and in the kitchen, metric units are the norm. And they're the only units that have been taught in schools, really, since the 60s. Unfortunately, I think most people who advocate imperial units don't actually know. If you had, for example, to convert between inches and miles, even with a calculator, unless you have certain pieces of information, you wouldn't be able to do that. And so, I'm just thinking now, for example, of Neil and his fish, or for that matter, Stephen and his bananas. You know how much a banana weighs in ounces, or a fish weighs in ounces or pounds. You've got a ton container to fill. You want to know how many of those units you want to fit in that container. If you're using imperial, you can't do it unless you actually know the conversion factors between each of the units. And that makes it a very unwieldy system. In metric, it's all by 1,000. You know exactly that there are 1,000 grams in a kilo, there are 1,000 kilos in a ton, there are 1,000,000 grams in a ton. So nothing could be simpler.
Can I just leave in, Peter? Just one second. You said you're a doctor, you're a GP.
Yeah.
And if you're advising some of your patients who may be a little overweight to lose weight, would you tell them how to lose the weight, what language, what system of weight measures? Would they be generally being told in stones and pounds? And
well, it's very interesting because
babies
that's a very good point. I'm glad you raised that because we tend to think in terms of BMI, which is your body mass index, which is effectively is your weight divided by your height squared. So that's actually a more valid measurement. And you can't do that in pounds and inches. It's just not possible. There's no way. It's simply not a language that you can talk.
That wasn't the question. That wasn't the question. Come on.
That might be the case. That might be the case, Peter. But can I ask this, Peter? Is it still a criminal offence, or would it be a criminal offence if someone wanted to put, a simple little machine to measure someone's height in this country, right? And if we've all seen those things where you can stand under and they push the bar down to the top of your head. Is it a criminal offence for someone to create a machine which tells you if you're 5'10"?
The rulers are measured in both units. Rulers and measuring tapes always have both units and have done for a number of years. That's just how it's done. Ever since the Magna Carta.
But are you telling me, Peter, that the majority of people in this country wouldn't think of themselves as being 5'8", 5'9", 5'10", 6 foot?
Well, I was in school in the 60s, and we were taught metric units then. It's not a new thing. It's been going on ever since 1861. The UK has been committed to metrication. It's nothing to do with the EU. And the rest of the world, with the exception of America, and they use different units than us in imperial anyway, the rest of the world has essentially gone metric, including most of the Commonwealth. Now, I agree with you that some people will think in terms of inches and some people will think in terms of centimetres. A lot of people are citizens of the world. They've travelled a lot. They actually do use centimetres for heights and they use kilos for weight. And I tend to encourage people to think in kilos simply because it's so much easier to work out how much weight you've lost. Say you're 14 stone 5 and you've lost weight down to 12 stone 10. How long does it take you to work out that difference? Because you've got to know there are 14 pounds in a stone and so on. It becomes a quite complex calculation. So it's simply common sense.
For most people. It becomes very simple for most people, and that's the way they talk. Jason Manford, the comedian, the Manchester comedian, has just announced that he's lost 3 stone on a diet. We had Harry and Meghan announce the birth weight of Lilibet at £7.11. So you've got to think, are these people in the minority just trying to convince people that the rest of us are wrong or the rest of us are right, or is this the language you speak? We're speaking.
I just wonder, and I don't mean to be offensive, but I just wonder if the majority of people listening to both of you might be thinking that the world is all about freedom now. You know, the internet is about you watch, you read, you do what you want when you want to do it. And here you are both wanting to limit people to how they speak in a particular
Stephen,
measurement.
If I can stop you there, we have never been anti-metric. We've always been pro-freedom of choice, and it's about the language and the weights and measures that people want to use. We actually fought in Worcester for an Austrian landlady who's been threatened with prosecution for selling beer by the litre, which under the regulations is also a criminal offence. And she was allowed to continue to trade because of our intervention. So we're most certainly not trying to advocate one system or the other.
All right.
Well, certainly not. Peter, yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Do you really think, Peter, this in this day and age matters to people? Or should they not be able to use whatever measurement they want to?
Okay, 2 things to say about that. I mean, one, we had pounds, shillings and pence in this country. Imagine that people had said, well, you're free to use whichever currency you like. I want to sell in pounds, shillings and pence. You can buy in pounds and pence. You know, how would that work? You know, you've got to have some agreement as to the fact that one person is selling, one person is buying, you've got to be talking the same language. And as I said earlier, ever since the Magna Carta, it has been a principle that there should be a standard system of weights and measures in the country. And that hasn't changed. It's just what has changed is the world has gone metric, including, I have to say, all the Commonwealth, with minor exceptions in Canada. All the other Commonwealth countries followed the UK, which in 1965 decided that metric was the only way forward. Other Commonwealth countries took the bull by the horns and actually did it and converted. I'm Irish. In Ireland, all street signs and distances and speeds are in kilometres. And there was no problem about making that conversion. It happened fairly seamlessly and nobody would go back to miles there now.
Yeah, but if you're Irish, Peter, you'll then know, because I'm Northern Irish, I'm sitting tonight in Northern Ireland.
Indeed.
So you will know that you go an hour up the road, you're in Northern Ireland, the street signs are in miles, the road signs are in miles, and people can effortlessly cope with both. I'll drive down to Dublin next week.
Well, exactly.
Out of a mile measurement and a kilometre measurement. And I very much doubt that thousands of travellers that do that every day have a problem with it.
But if in the name of freedom, say a local council could opt to put up signs in whichever unit they wanted to, just as any trader could sell in whichever units they wanted to, then that would be a problem. And I mean, at the end of the day, you will say, Stephen, I'm quite sure this is a trivial issue, why we're talking about it. And it does feel slightly to me as if the people pushing imperial measures are being used by a government that actually wants to deflect attention from some of the issues. I think this is a dead cat in a way, because I don't think
we've never been pushed or coerced or manipulated by any government.
Well, you see, I don't actually. Agenda. I don't think that Ian Duncan Smith or Jacob Rees-Mogg, seriously believe that the imperial units are better. It's just that the word imperial appeals to their following. And, it is in a sense, a piece of nostalgia for times gone by. And you might as well say, well, let's bring back the cart and horse, or let's bring back the stocks on the village green. Those days have gone, and I think we have to move on. And we've got to understand, you've given a very good example there, Stephen. When you cross a border, you suddenly have to convert in your mind from one unit to another. Why should you have to do that? The rest of the world have gone metric. And it's not just Europe. This is a very important point. People think that metric units are EU units, and we left the EU so we can leave them behind. The Commonwealth is metric, I agree with Neil to some degree that there have been opt-outs within the EU. Britain has always been allowed to use pints. We're not saying that needs to change right away, but what we're saying is that going back is a step into the past, and that would be retrograde and damaging and harmful. And what's more, I think a lot of our commercial rivals are laughing at us because actually having a dual system. Sorry?
You said it would be harmful.
It is. I think having a dual system is actually getting in the way of effective trade and industry in this country. I think a lot of our commercial rivals are laughing at us because with the dual system, we're to some extent stymied.
Sorry, Peter. The best thing probably to do is for a political party to put it in its manifesto that it's going to metricate the country, it's going to metricate the roads, it's going to tell people that they have to drink by the litre, they have to buy the goods in metric. And if you're going to talk to each other and trade, they must do it because you're a bit backward if you use imperial measures. So we have to move forward with metric measures, put it in the manifesto, and do you think they'd get elected?
I'm not a politician. I think it would be extremely wise if politicians would stand up and make the case because, I think the case is there to be made. And, I've told you what we think. We think it's a very strong and compelling argument. And we think that, if politicians took the bull by the horns, as they have done, I have to say, in every other Commonwealth country and in Ireland, they've all made the conversion from imperial to metric. It can be done. At the moment.
Why have the children who you say have been the metric educated generation, why do they announce the birth rate of their children in imperial measures? Why do they watch Harry Kane and shout when he scores from 12 yards and they talk and understand the language? And they talk about their heights in imperial measures and they buy the shirt sizes in inches.
Well, it's fascinating.
Changed?
So you mentioned sport.
I didn't think talking about pounds and ounces and the metric martyrs would be this interesting, but I have found it interesting. So, Peter, thank you. Neil, thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We're heading towards the news. Here's the number, 08085 909 693. And we'll be back with some of your calls after the 11 o'clock news.